Oh,
Okay, go ahead.
all right, everyone. Thanks for logging in. This is, as the title says, the OAC Expert Series on backpacking. So hopefully, all of you have, either gone backpacking before or are really interested in giving it a try as soon as, all of this pandemic stuff is over with. So just to give, let's see if I can get this to go through. So what we're going to talk about today is obviously kind of like me and Jess are going to give a quick intro. We're going to talk about the types of land that you can actually go backpacking on, which is especially important out in the West. The gear that you'll need for the trip, and some suggestions on brands of gear to get, and then also maybe just like showing and talking about some of the gear that we have ourselves. Then going into how to actually plan the trip, and then a quick overview of some of the places you can go around LA to backpack. And hopefully, a lot of the time will be taken up with Q&A, just so that I'm sure everyone has a specific question or worry that they logged in to kind of learn about. So that'll be kind of your time to get those questions answered. So I guess to kick it off, Jess, you want to do a quick intro on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi guys. I feel like I know mostly everyone who's here, but for people who don't know me, my name is Jessica. I'm this year's director of backpacking and next year's VP of backpacking for OAC. I used to lead backpacking trips in college up at Middlebury in Vermont. So I'm more familiar with the East Coast in terms of locations, but super excited to explore the West Coast as well.
Hey everyone, my name is Ben. And yeah, I've done a lot of backpacking out west. I moved out here maybe like 5 years ago. So I've done a lot of backpacking, mostly in the Sierras, but a little bit around here too since school started. So let's give it a go. So the West is giant. And just because of the way that the expansion happened from people moving out west during the gold rush and for other reasons, who knows why someone wanted to move out west, but there are tons of different government agencies that actually manage the land. In California, there's 3 that are the most important that you should be aware of. The first is obviously the national parks. The next is the national forests. And then a third is the Bureau of Land Management. And as you can see in California, in Southern California, those are the 3 that are the main government agencies that you would run into with the types of land that you're trying to access. And all of them have different rules, all of them have different regulations, and it can get very confusing. But it's just important that you're at least aware of them, so you kind of know how to navigate the situations that you're in when it comes to like permits or figuring out where you're allowed to go, where you're allowed to camp. So now I'll pass it off to Jess to talk about gear.
Cool. That slide should say gear, but here we are. Anyway, so I'll cover like a bunch of different types of gear. We'll start with clothing and shoes. So the biggest thing here is just to avoid wearing anything cotton and denim. This is something that I've seen like lots of people do. And the main issue with it is that when you sweat, or like if you're raining or you're really warm, it doesn't wick away your sweat, so it makes you pretty uncomfortable in the long run. So good fabrics are like polyester and nylon, kind of like sweat wicking, like athletic materials, and then wool for socks. Your feet will always thank you if you have like tons of wool socks. Last thing is like always prepare for rain, like this GIF that I have. Like even if you see weather that's entirely sunny, there's always a chance for rain, so always bring rain gear. And then shoes wise, it's really kind of up to you and your feet. So I've listed some pretty popular common brands that like I know pretty well, but definitely try them on before you buy them, and also break them in before going on a big trip. I think those are kind of the key parts for shoes. Ryan, do you have any, Ben, do you have anything to add there?
Nope, I think you covered it. And I mean, I guess as far as shoes, those are something that you really have to, try on yourself. I think all the different brands have slightly different sizing. Yeah, I know, just like tennis shoes. So, it might be something that's difficult to buy online, but once you can go into REI, that would probably be the best way to figure out the brand that works for you best.
Yeah. Next slide. Cool. So then these are kind of like your holy trinity of what you need to go backpacking, right? Your backpack, your sleeping bag and pad, and then your tent. Those are kind of the three big things to really look at and really prioritize in terms of like things that you want. And the two things to look for, again, there's like, it's very customized to you, but things that are pretty lightweight because you're going to be carrying this on your back for like 8 to 10 miles a day. And then also comfortable for that same reason. So I think kind of the same goes where, especially for backpacks, you really want to be able to go into the store, see how it fits, see if you like the zippers. And then a lot of times the waistband can be like heat fitted to you. So you really want to prioritize comfort there because wearing it in the store for 5 minutes is going to be totally different than like wearing it on your hips with 30 pounds in it for 10 miles. Sleeping bags, I've also put some pretty good brands out there. Pads, there's tons of cool technology in sleeping pads these days. There's like blow up ones, there's like eggshell ones. Thermarest is a big brand. A good sleeping pad can really make your backpacking experience a lot better because that's where you're going to be sleeping on at night. So definitely a good investment. And then tent's kind of the same thing. You really want to have something lightweight, but also depending on kind of like how you want to set it up or a lot of personal preference there. So I've just listed MSR and REI are two kind of really big names in tents. But I think the same thing goes here in that don't buy something online, like definitely go try it on, definitely go like kind of go in person and see how it feels on you before committing to a purchase because some of these are pretty expensive. Next slide. Cool, this is our show and tell portion. So these are just kind of other things that are really useful when backpacking. If you haven't been before, they're probably not too familiar with you, so we thought we'd do a little show and tell. First one are bear bins, and
Oh, I've got that.
nice. Then here's gonna do our show and tell portion.
This is a bear bin.
So especially, and this was like new to me moving out west, like bears are a legitimate concern to be aware of when you're hiking. And they really like basically like anything that smells. So food waste, toothpaste. So kind of the main key is to put everything that a bear would potentially want in these bear bins. And they're kind of like tamper-proof with the lid, so bears like theoretically can't open them. So they're kind of clunky to carry around your bag, but pretty important so you don't, get waved to or mauled by a bear during your trip. There's a whole other bunch of ways, like hanging your food in trees. Some campsites will have like bear locks, like there on the campsite. So that's always something to be aware of. All right, next thing is camp stoves. Oh, look at that.
I got it all set
So
up.
you can light it for us. So camp stoves, especially
Should
on
I?
longer trips, it's really nice to have warm food at night and like
Oh.
coffee. Oh, you have like a fancy stove. And like coffee in the morning. So camp stoves are really key. Um, that's like a really nice version. I've worked with really janky versions before, but the main idea is that like they're lightweight. They use like white gas. I don't actually know what white gas is, like what kind of gas it is, but most places have them and they're really a lifesaver. All right, another important thing to have is a water filter.
I have this one.
Cool.
But
So water filters are great if you're backpacking a longer trip and you know you won't have access to tap water or clean water the whole time. So basically what these do is that you can pump any sort of, we've used like lake water, puddle water, and you can pump it through these filters so that you can actually have drinkable water for wherever you need it for your trip. There's lots of different kinds in different price ranges. There's like gravity ones, there's like pump ones. There's also like chemical tablets that we've used before as well. So pretty important to make sure you have clean water. Any other gear that you want to show and tell? You have them?
I guess, I mean, you'll probably go over a lot of it when you talk about like packing a backpack. I don't
Yeah.
know. I feel like most other stuff is just like a personal preference type thing.
Okay. We'll go next slide then. So now that you have all this gear and you're ready to go into the woods, what are you gonna do? You can't really just kind of like throw it in your pack. Then you're gonna end up looking like this guy on the left. So there really is kind of like an art and a method to packing your bag. And I think it is pretty important, again, because it really just guarantees like comfort and like durability on those really long hike days where all of this is resting on your back. So this is kind of a really busy infographic. I apologize, I couldn't find a simpler one. But I think the main takeaways are the bottom of your bag is going to be like your sleeping bag and stuff like that, things that you wouldn't really use during the day. In kind of this middle area, you want to leave everything really heavy, right? So it's like your waist can carry kind of like the brunt of the weight you're carrying. So you want to put the heaviest stuff kind of closer to that. So that's going to be like your stove, that nice bear canister we saw, any like really heavy, dense food items, and etc. all go in the middle. Things on top or kind of further up are going to be things that you would potentially be using during the day. So rain gear, other layers, lunches and snacks, kind of like things that are easily accessible to you. What else is notable of here? And then it's really a question of personal preference. So like, what do you have on your sides? Maybe your poles, easy access to water, camera, GPS, etc. So it's really, the main takeaways are keeping things that you're going to use during the day, easy access, and then keeping heavy things on the bottom. Also, if you're carrying fuel canisters of white gas, keep those kind of separate from other things in case they explode. That's really useful in winter camping scenarios. Yeah, any questions there about packing a bag?
I got a question. I'm
Sure.
curious how y'all approach like how much clothes you pack for like multi-day kind of trip and stuff. Like I've heard some people reuse like a lot of stuff. Like when I've gone before, I've like reused a lot of clothing. Some people like think that's disgusting and they like have to change their clothes twice a day kind of thing. You know, I'm curious how y'all approach it.
I typically go pretty minimal. I'll try to like
Yeah.
have a few outfits for the day and then like one outfit to sleep in. Definitely not like one per day kind of thing. And then kind of like your camp outfits of like layers and fleeces and like heavier stuff that you'll wear when it gets cold. But then
Mhm.
during the day, it's like you're gonna sweat in it and you're gonna sweat in it again. So I would say kind of like err on the more minimal side.
All right, cool.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think I probably rarely change. But like if you're camping near like water, you can always like rinse off your clothes and stuff overnight and hang them up to dry. Or you can get like merino wool clothes. So, ideally you'd be able to wear them for, weeks and they still wouldn't smell. But
Mm.
that I think tends to be pretty expensive. I don't know though. I don't have any. But.
Cool. Thanks.
Cool. Any other questions on this slide or anything I've covered so far? Cool, let's go next slide. All right, so if you're like totally new to backpacking, this is probably pretty overwhelming to you, especially because like if you look up the price of a backpack, it's pretty expensive, as are lots of these things. So if you don't want to buy anything yet, there's lots of rental options, which are pretty cool. So UCLA's Rec Center, like right at Woodin, actually does rentals of basically all the big gear that I mentioned. So everything from backpacks, sleeping bags, tents, camp stoves. They even rent like pooper scoopers, like little trowels. So that's kind of fun, even though it probably costs less to buy one. But they do like nightly rentals, weekly rentals, break long rentals for pretty affordable prices. If that doesn't work, REI actually also does rentals. This is cool, especially if you want to test like a specific backpack or something. REI often has that backpack brand available to rent. If you're kind of like ready to take the plunge and you know what brand you want and you're comfortable with it, these are some kind of common places that I would go to buy outdoor gear. So REI is a big one. I like Moose Jaw a lot, and Backcountry often has a lot of good deals. I will say too, like backpacks are pretty expensive, but they do last like basically your life. The backpack I've had since high school, and it's a really sentimental attachment to it. And then the last thing is you can always ask in the OAC Slack if you're going on a trip and need something. There's so many of us who are like super into the outdoors, and people are always willing to share tents or share tips and any gear that someone might already have. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so you've got all your gear and now you're ready to plan your trip. And the most important thing here is really you just want to be prepared. So listen to SCAR. But how do you actually go about planning that trip? The first thing you really need to understand is, how many nights do you have available to do this trip? Is it like a weekend where you only have one night, so Saturday, Sunday, holiday weekend, maybe Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or something longer. So that's going to maybe be the biggest determinant of how far you want to drive to go on this trip, or even how long of a hike you want to go on. So it's also important to understand, like, how far do you feel capable of hiking in a day, and how far can you go and actually still enjoy it. So that side of things is something that you really kind of have to figure out for yourself over time. Personally, I like to take it slow and kind of like stretch it out as long as I can. But other people, like to, hike marathons or something in a day, like something crazy like that. But so, once you figured out, the number of nights, how far you want to go, then you need to figure out, and you've decided, okay, like you want to go to a certain national park, national forest, or BLM area. You need to figure out what's the permit situation. And this is something that is kind of unique to California, just due to how many people there are here. If you were to be in Colorado or maybe Utah or Nevada, permits aren't as big of a thing. They really are only common for hikes that are super, super popular. But in California, they're required almost everywhere in the Sierras, and some places near LA as well. And that's really just to limit the number of people on the trails, to kind of limit the impact. But it also allows the national park or national forest to track the number of people that are using it, for funding reasons, as well as where to allocate those funds to actually help maintain trails. So permits are important. And the thing that really sucks is, quite frankly, is that it's different in every single park. For example, in the top right, this is an example of a permit that you get from Yosemite. And to get that, you have to go to a website called YosemiteConservancy.org, which is unaffiliated with the national park, but they've delegated the permitting to this almost nonprofit that takes care of Yosemite. Whereas if you were to go to Sequoia, the process is very different, and you actually have to email in a PDF that you've filled out to the rangers, and then 2 weeks to a month later, you actually get a response saying if you did or you didn't get the permit. Some national forests are on the recreation.gov website, and you get permits through that. So it's very confusing, and I'd say that's one of the biggest deterrents to a lot of people. It can be a very daunting system to figure out, but like we're here to help, and persistence in figuring figuring out how to, get those permits is definitely, something that is, I definitely suggest you put in the time to figure out, because understanding it helps a ton. And, once you've kind of figured all this out, or even before, it's always super important to call a ranger if you're confused about anything or it's your first time to the area, because the national forest and national park system, they don't really update anything online. So you may be planning on going to a trailhead, but the road there might be closed and they haven't updated that information online, but they know that they haven't actually driven out and opened the gate yet. So that's just like a quick anecdote. It's important to call the ranger. They'll also tell you, maybe there's some last minute openings to permits they can let you in. Maybe they have suggestions on other routes that you can actually go on. So they tend to be very helpful, especially if it's, at areas like national forests, where, people are probably calling in less often. Personally, I haven't had like the best experience with the rangers in Yosemite, but that's probably because there's millions of people going there every summer. So I don't know, they probably have to deal with some crazy situations. But also getting the map is also super important. I'd say more important than like a compass or a GPS or anything. If you know where you're starting, in where you are, the map. So personally, I don't really carry a compass because I check the map that I have for the area like very, very often to understand like where am I at, where is there water, where do I want to go. And going to the next slide, the two maps that I think are the best for California are these National Geographic maps, and those cover, primarily national parks. So I think the National Geographic map series covers everywhere in the Sierras. But if you're looking for maybe like more remote areas, this map on the right is part of a series by this guy called Tom Harrison. And so I don't know, I haven't really looked at it, but I think his full-time job is he just goes around hiking every trail and tracking it out and then releases these maps. And from a lot of people I've met backpacking in the Sierras, they swear by these. And there's even trails on these that aren't on the official National Geographic Park maps. So those are probably like the two biggest, sources of information that I personally go to figure out where I want to go. You can also check out All Trails. I think you just have to make an account. It's free. And I mean, I think you can print things out, but you may have to pay a subscription. But I think the maps are the tried and true method that really works really well. So now you know where you're going. You have the permit. You've talked to the ranger. Now comes the part where you actually have to pack or decide what to pack. And this is something that really comes with experience, I'd say. Personally, I probably started out with way too much stuff and then just became more and more efficient each time I went by, saying like, oh, okay, I don't need that shirt. I don't need that extra Cliff Bar. Like I know how much I'm going to eat. So when you're thinking about how much food to pack, that really plays into it, the experience. If you're going out your first time, I definitely say, overpack on food. You don't want to be hungry. If it's your first, second or third time, you want to enjoy yourself. You don't want to put yourself necessarily in a situation where you might not enjoy it and then decide that you don't like it. So I'd say like overpack on food. And that means, planning out what are you going to eat for breakfast? What are you going to eat for lunch? What are you going to eat for dinner? And then maybe a snack in between those. So, that's different for everybody. But I tend to go to these Mountain House freeze-dried meals for dinner. And then for lunch, it'll be something, simple like PB&J with tortilla. And then in the morning for breakfast, Mountain House also has some breakfast items, but usually that's just whatever I can scrounge together. One thing that I definitely suggest is in the bottom right, laying everything out before you actually go and pack. And that's super important because if you're just packing as you're going, you're going to forget what you actually have. And by laying it out, you can kind of categorize things like I've done here. Okay, like food is in the top right, clothes and other accessories in the bottom left, and then, bare bin and everything else that needs to go in there is already there. I'm ready to go. I can account for everything, and then I can get everything packed up. So I definitely suggest doing that. And then the next thing is, you probably shouldn't really ever go out backpacking by yourself unless you're like super experienced. So another thing that you can do is actually split up weight. I think with a lot of the, kind of entry level or beginner gear, so like the REI Half Dome tent, for example, it weighs, I think, like 5 pounds, but it's also super cheap. So like my tent weighs maybe like half that, but it's a one-person tent. So for example, you could split up the weight of that REI Half Dome tent with whoever you're hiking with in two, and it's equivalent to you carrying a super expensive light tent that would only fit one person. So splitting up weight is a way that not only you can kind of like equalize the weight that you're carrying with somebody else, but also really get everything out of your gear, even if it isn't, the $500, $600, tent or sleeping bag or, whatever other gear you have. So, some people don't like to do that. It can be difficult to like, okay, buy something that you can actually figure out how much your pack weighs and then go around and, make sure everything is equal, but it's just something to think about. Next is you actually still in this day and age have to usually go to a ranger station to pick up the permit. And that's because, some people don't show up, or some people show up and there's less people on their party than there otherwise would have been, or, there's less people than the application said there was going to be. So this is, again, just another way for them to track what you're doing. And you'll usually have to go and sign some sort of piece of paper that says, I'm responsible if, there's a fire, or I understand the risks of, whatever situations that I may be in. But it's also for the rangers to give you like, firsthand information of what's going on, during that time frame. So, maybe there was a lot of rain and there's been flash flooding. They'll tell you. Maybe if you're going winter hiking, there was a recent avalanche, they'll tell you. So that's also really helpful for you to kind of like figure out what's going on in the area. And one thing is that in particular with national parks and the national forests in the Sierras, you'll have to tell the rangers where you're planning on camping each night. And so this kind of like plays into the fact that you need to know, where you're going. Like they really want to see that you have a plan, like you've thought this out. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be at all those campsites on the day that you said you would be, or even camp where you told them you would. All that they're really looking for is that you've thought about this, you have a plan, and you're not just, jumping into this willy-nilly. Because, if you're going on a longer trip, you can run out of food, you can be in situations where that planning really makes a difference. And, the last thing is that everyone really has different preferences when packing. Personally, I prefer more of the weight on the right side of my pack. That's just because of the way my backpack sits on my back. And, everybody has these intricacies that you kind of like figure out as you go. And really, the best way to do that is just to get out there. Like, don't be intimidated. If you're carrying tons and tons of weight, like, whatever, who cares about the guy that like shaves down his toothbrush to shave like half an ounce? Like, screw that guy. Like, nobody likes that guy. But you guys just really need to get out there. But at the same time, make sure not to pack too much, because you won't have a good time. You want to make sure that you're inspired by what you're doing. Like, you want to have a good time, you want to enjoy being out in nature, being with your friends. And, if you're just walking around all day with, 50 pounds, you're probably not going to have a good time. So we can circle back to questions on that, but I do want to talk about backpacking around LA. So the great thing about LA is that, similar to a lot of sports or activities, you can do it all year round. So here I've circled the 3 closest, forests or national parks that you can actually go to to backpack. And the way that I kind of categorize it is in the top left, that's like the Santa Barbara area. So that's called the Los Padres National Forest. And there's an area there called the Sespe Wilderness, and you can go there, no permit, anything. You just drive up to the trailhead, you park, and you can just hike in wherever you want. So that's nice because there's not too many people that are there. You know, it's farther away from LA, and you know, if people are going to drive the 2 hours to get up there, you know, they might as well drive to, I don't know, Big Bear or something and go camping there. So, you know, I like that area if you're looking for something a little more remote. There's a lot of hot springs in that area, which is nice. You know, you can, you know, take a whole day hiking out to some hot springs, you know, hang out there for the night or another day, and then hike out and just drive back to LA. So that's nice. And the Angeles National Forest and the area around Big Bear here, there's, I think, less backpacking. Personally, I don't know of too many people that have, you know, gone on more wilderness backpacking trips here. There's a lot of campsites in the Angeles National Forest that are first come, first serve. And I've got them all tagged on my Google Maps, so I can share them with you if you're looking for them. But the way that would look is, you know, you just park your car somewhere, you get on a trail, and the biggest issue is that you just have to hope that there's an open campsite at whatever camp you show up to. There's some wilderness camping allowed in Angeles National Forest, but I think Ryan Keyes and I, another VP, are still trying to figure out exactly like where you can go and do that. And I think in the San Bernardino National Forest over near Big Bear here to the right, it's a little more open, but still I think most people go there to car camp. The next area is kind of the Palm Springs Joshua Tree area. So, you know, Joshua Tree is, you know, it's great if you're, you know, into almost any sort of sport, you know, trail running, biking, climbing, you can all do that there throughout the entire winter. And the nice thing about there is that even though it's a national park, there are no quotas for the permits. And what I mean by quotas is that if you were to go to the Sierras, the quota designates the number of people that can enter on a trail on any given day. And so I'll touch on that a little bit later. But the point is that in Joshua Tree, you just have to go to any parking lot that has, let me just go back here, any of these permits in the bottom right. This one says National Forest, but the ones in Joshua Tree look pretty much identical. And you'll go to a parking lot and it'll have this box there. You fill out your information, put a tag in your car, and then as long as you're a mile away from the road, you're allowed to camp. Now, I think there's, I don't know too many people that have been kind of in the Palm Springs area. This is near Mount San Jacinto, but I know that there are a lot of trails, and the Pacific Crest Trail actually goes through this area. So I think there's also a lot of wilderness camping here, although it's much more mountainous. And one more thing just to be aware of, if you're camping or backpacking around LA, water is pretty limited. So that's maybe the biggest challenge if you go to any of these places. There's definitely the most water up in the Los Padres National Forest because a lot of the trails follow rivers there. But if you're, you know, backpacking in Joshua Tree, for example, you would have to carry all the water that you're planning on drinking or leave it at parking lots along the way because the trail passes by those. And even if you go to them, you'll see people have left jugs of water there with their name on it because they're planning on picking it up as they backpack through the park. So now if you're, you know, willing to spend, you know, 3, 4, 5, or even 6 hours getting to the Sierras, I've got a map here of the Southern Sierras. So if you look, I don't know, can you guys see my mouse? Yeah. So this, oh, it just disappeared. So this area right here, where my mouse is Lone Pine. And that's about 3 hours away from where we are, like in LA near UCLA, just to give you like a sense of context. So that's right here. But then the real challenge is like getting into the mountains. So the roads are, you know, winding and long, and, you know, you can get to Lone Pine in 3 hours, and it takes you 40 minutes to get from there up into the mountains to the trailhead. So, that can be, that's just something to be aware of, that, this is pretty far away. You either have to be ready to drive all night to get there or have a longer weekend. And the things to be aware of here is that the things that are most easily accessible from LA are actually wilderness or national forest, which is pretty great. Just because the roads on the western side that access Sequoia and Kings Canyon, they're a lot longer. So it takes maybe 5 or 6 hours to get there. To get to an equal, northern distance, I forget if that's longitude or latitude, it's much quicker. The only downside is that the trails here are a little more intense because the mountains shoot right up from the valley, almost like 9,000 to 10,000 feet. So it's a bit more challenging to actually gain that altitude to kind of like get to the plateau of the Sierras. Other places that are great are honestly just down here. The Golden Trout Wilderness, this entire area down here is part of, I think, what's called the Sequoia National Forest. Oh yeah, there it is. And so, that's a great area because that's all wilderness. So you either don't need a permit to go out there, or there's non-quota permits. So that just means either you just show up at the trailhead, or you go to the ranger station and, okay, you're letting us know you're. But there is one national forest called the Inyo National Forest, which is the most easily accessible, and that's spelled INYO. And that's the national forest that runs all along this highway right here, the 395. And that has permits for every single trailhead, and you can access those permits on recreation.gov. And that process is super simple, but you still have to pick up the permit in person. And the reason there's quotas there is because a lot of mountaineers, skiers, and climbers like to go here to kind of access the steeper peaks. And so the government and the national forest is trying to limit the number of people to limit the impact. So I just wanted to show you the Inyo National Forest as an example of what the permitting system might look like. And this is on the right actually a screenshot from recreation.gov, and this shows you just how many trailheads there actually are. So it can be a pretty daunting process, and the Sierras is definitely the most confusing, again, because for every single area here, there's a different permit system, and it definitely is pretty daunting to understand. So happy to answer any questions about that. And that's the end of the presentation, and we'll open it up for Q&A if anybody's got any.
Yeah, Ben. So as you guys as you start to look for permits and that sort of thing, you usually pick up like one of the National Geographic maps, so then if the area is like part of the national forest or national park, or do you just start with like web search and like kick around on Google for a while? What's like your starting point once you like know kind of what area you generally are looking at?
Yeah, I think first I'll start with all trails just to see like all on the screenshot on the left here actually pulled from all trails, and I like that because it really easily designates, especially when you zoom in, the borders of all the national forests and parks in the wilderness. And it also has probably like 80% of the actual trails. So that's always a good starting point to understand at least, like, is there going to be water? How far is the trail? And to hear about other people's, experiences actually hiking it. From there, I'll probably go to the actual national forest site to figure out, how many permits are allowed per day. What's the process in place for that trailhead? And that's the confusing part, because the National Forest website in particular is pretty archaic and very confusing. And you can find yourself clicking through like 10, 20 different menus before you really find what you're looking for. So that's the point where if you're like not too experienced with like knowing exactly where to get to, it's really easier just to sit on the phone for 10 minutes and wait for the ranger to pick up. So I would definitely suggest before, spending the 30 minutes clicking through the National Forest website, you'd rather sit 10 minutes on hold waiting for a ranger to talk to, and just being honest with them and just saying like, hey, it's my first time in the area, what should I do? And they'll be super helpful. And then, usually once I have everything in place, then I'll order the map online, just because it's really, for me, I use it mostly, while I'm hiking. But then it's, I think they cost like $10 each. And then it's kind of like a nice thing to have. You can take a look at it and see, what trails are there that might not be on all trails. So I know like, oh, there might not be as many people there. But yeah, the map is definitely the last step, I'd say.
Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Are y'all aware of any like really popular areas around here that have quotas and stuff that you have to permit out like really far in advance?
In the LA area, no. In a lot of the popular trails in the Sierras, yes. So, for example, like if you want to do Half Dome, it's a lottery system. Like it's like a 5% chance of getting it. If you want to hike Mount Whitney, a similar situation, there's a lottery system. But I think the point is that you'll always be able to find a trail to hike on. Like maybe it's not like Half Dome or Whitney, which are, things that everyone wants to kind of do in their life while they're living in California, but you'll still be able to like kind of get out and do something. Does that help answer the question? Or
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions or?
I know it's personal preference, but what do you guys use for your like bowls, plates, sport, like eating stuff?
I have this like metal bowl that I've had for like ever. I don't even know where it's from. I feel like a dog could eat out of it, but it's a great metal bowl. It survived a long time.
I have mine right here. I'm trying to find it. I tend to like the Sea to Summit stuff. Carl, I think you guys use that too, right?
I have one of the Summit cook
Oh yeah,
pots,
those are
but
good.
not bowls. Yeah.
Yeah. So like the Sea to Summit stuff, it
Yeah.
kind of like folds down flat, which is nice. So you can just stick it in the top of your pack, or easily set it on top of whatever you have in your bear bin. And that just kind of makes it easier. And the spork, I don't know, just a plastic thing for me, I guess.
Super slick.
But yeah.
I got another question. Sorry, I got a lot of them.
Oh no, it's okay.
Just for like as far as packing and like safety kind of stuff, like do you just use like a stock first aid kit you get from REI or one of those things, or do you like pack your own stuff? You bring any extra stuff? Like, have you ever had to pack like anti-venom for like rattlesnakes or anything like that? Or is that like one of those things you just deal with if you get bit?
I haven't.
Okay.
I don't think
Does
I've ever.
anybody do that? I was like curious about that when I was like going to the desert.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never heard of anybody
Okay.
bringing
Yeah.
antivenom. I think like snake bites are pretty uncommon. I'm not 100% sure. I do know that in the Sierras, it's illegal to use bear mace.
Oh.
So yeah, and that's because all the bear. If you were to see a bear in the Sierras, it's brown, but the species is still black bear, and so the black bears like tend to mind their own business. And what happens is if you spray them with mace, they actually get angry and are more likely to attack. And also it hurts them. It probably hurts their eyes, I think. And just with like leave no trace policies and the national park system, I'd say, primarily being there to preserve the natural environment. Rangers prefer that you don't spray bears with mace. And, that's why the bear bins are required, just so that you can like separate yourself from things that the bears would be tempted to actually get.
I'll add one thing to the first aid kit. One of the things that we've found that's like really good to have is like Pepto-Bismol makes like little tablets, and like if you get out and are at high altitudes or like just eat something like that doesn't sit well with you on the trail, like having those can be a lifesaver to just like essentially just make your stomach calm down and feel better. So we've like made sure to pack those on all of our trips.
That's good tip.
Another thing I would add is like lots of band-aids and blister tape. So having a blister on your foot can like ruin your trip because you're gonna feel it every single step. So I always bring like tons of band-aids and just like athletic tape. And moleskin is a really cool like spongy skin-like material. That's like really a lifesaver in terms of blisters.
Cool. Thanks.
Any other questions? Guess it's almost 8. Nope. Well, thanks everybody for calling in. Feel free to reach out to either of us, or to be frank, anybody on the board. I think we've got Carl and Steve here, and they're also both really experienced backpackers. So tons of people at your disposal to kind of like help you figure out what to do. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.
Well, thanks so much for doing this, you guys. This is really awesome.
Yeah.
Yep.
Happy to. Yeah.
Right.